Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talks with Gallagher, where we are having conversations that empower both seasoned and emerging leaders, both in ministry and in the marketplace. Tonight, I have with me Alan, and he's actually a new friend. He somehow found me on Facebook, and he had a podcast, and he found out I had a podcast, and so we had this agreement to, hey, can I be on your show? Oh, can you be on mine? And so this is how this has happened. And so when I was on with him, earlier. It's been a couple of weeks now. It was a really fun conversation. Really enjoyed just our dialogue, and also was listened to some of his other shows that he had, his episodes, and just really liked his heart and his passion and his zeal. And the guests that he had on were quality. And so I was just thrilled to have him on. And so I'm just excited just to hear, just your heart tonight. I found out that you are, just have a heart for revival and for missions. Just would like to unpack that a little bit tonight. And keep in mind, this is this is live and unscripted with Talks with Gallagher.
Yes.
Okay, so enjoy the ride tonight. So, Alan, just to dive right in here, I'm just curious. Can you just share a little bit about your spiritual journey first?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I was born and raised in Texas. I was actually the first baby born in Texas in 1985. And so I'm New Year's baby. I grew up in a Christian home. And I've been a missionary for all of my adult life. No, none of my family members were missionaries when I was growing up, except for my grandmother.
Oh,
And
wow.
my grandmother had been a missionary in Africa, and she had been through crazy war times there. She had adopted some children who were orphans of war there.
Hmm.
And so every time I would see her, which was usually once a year for like family reunion or something like that,
Hmm.
it was amazing how I saw her so little, but she knew that I had this calling to missions on my life. I've always been
Hmm.
a Christian. I was baptized whenever I was younger, and knew the Lord. I grew up in church, always loved Jesus, always was very passionate about the things of God.
Hmm.
And so my grandmother, she saw this call on my life, and she always told me, every single year she would tell me this story of how whenever I was 2 years old, this is when we were living in Plano, Texas, we had this little
Hmm.
apple tree in the back of our backyard. We just lived in a little suburb place, and I would go out there and play. And she told me every year she saw me about how whenever it was like 2 years, I don't know how old I was, it
Hmm.
was like 2 or 3 years old, but every year
Yeah.
she told me the story how she went out and I was playing out in the backyard, and she asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And I said that
Hmm.
I wanted to preach the gospel, that I wanted to be a missionary. So she told me
Wow.
that every year. And because of that, since I was a child, all I wanted to do was be a missionary. My mother, God spoke to her very clearly to homeschool me,
Hmm.
which wasn't even really legal back then, and it was frowned upon quite a
Hmm.
bit. And
Hmm.
but she felt like she gave up dental school. She had this scholarship to what
Wow.
was it, some big fancy school, and so she
Yeah.
started homeschooling me. But it was a very non-traditional. Homeschooling was already not traditional, but
Hmm.
then she went a completely different route of training me specifically to be in ministry. And
Wow.
so whenever I was a kid, I learned all the stuff you learn, math and reading and writing, all that kind of stuff. But there
Yeah.
was a huge focus on Bible study and especially missionary stories. So
Okay.
she would,
Hmm.
back then they had these VHS tapes with people like John Wycliffe's story and
Hmm.
Hudson Taylor and all these guys. And she would have me watch these videos, and I would read I read Fox's Book of Martyrs several times,
Hmm.
and probably the most influential book in my life at the time, which I actually have it right here. I actually just bought this book for my son because I homeschool him, which
Oh.
is the
Oh,
Journals of
wow.
Jim Elliot.
Jim Elliott. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this book right here, the
Wow.
Journals of Jim Elliot, was a huge influence on my life.
Hmm.
And whenever I read it, I decided I want to be a missionary to people and tribal people. At that time, other than my grandmother, I didn't know any missionaries at all.
Yeah.
And so I was growing up. I turned 13, still had never met a missionary, didn't really know how you became a missionary, what that meant. I just knew that I wanted to preach the gospel. I had this experience whenever I don't know, I was probably about 10 years old, but I grew up in a very conservative church. Pretty much my whole family is Baptist. They don't really believe in speaking in tongues or miracles or healing or any of those things. And so I was never taught that. But whenever I was about 10 years old there in Texas, I had a dog. And I don't know if you know what a Chinese pug is, but they're these super ugly little compact dogs that have big bug eyes. They're really ugly, but that's what we had. I love them. And so I had this one dog named Mandy, and Mandy got in a fight with another one of our dogs called Mario, and Mario actually scratched her eye out of her socket.
Oh my gosh.
And so my mom had called the vet, and the vet was saying, "Oh, you have to amputate the eye. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't like push it back in or anything like that."
Oh my gosh.
And so I was devastated. And so I took Mandy, and my mom, I was, crying as a little kid. I was just bawling. And my mom took Mandy and put her in the bathroom so that none of the other dogs would try to chew the rest of her eye off or something like that, just waiting to go to the vet. And so I, as a kid, not knowing, this is childlike faith, right? I knew nothing. And I went in my backyard and I was so upset. And I remember praying, and I was actually praying, and I was saying, this is probably the wrong way to pray. And so don't get into theology about it. But I just was like, devil, you have to get away from my dog. Because nobody ever taught me anything. Like, get away from my dog and all that kind of stuff. And I was crying. I was like, God, please do something. Help Mandy. And my mom called me, and outside, I was in the backyard, and she said, you need to come get Mandy. We have to take her to the vet. So I went into the bathroom, and I open up the bathroom door, and I walk in, and Mandy is there. Her eyeball is hanging out. And as I'm standing there watching her, I watched her eye go and suck back into her face.
Oh my gosh.
And whenever that happened, I freaked out. And of course, I grab Mandy and I go and I tell my mom, I'm like, oh, we don't need to take her now. She's fine. God healed her. And my mom, of course, starts screaming. She's calling everybody. And so for the next several years that I lived in that part of Texas, the whole neighborhood had heard about it because they all knew my mom was a big dog breeder. So they all had heard about what happened to this. These pugs are worth a lot of money. And so my nickname for several years was Moses. That's what everyone in the neighborhood called me because of this miracle that had happened. And I didn't understand it. And I had no experience. Nobody around me understood it until I was about 13 years old. I had moved to another part of Texas, and a group of missionaries, the first group I had ever met, they came to my church. They were a group from an organization called YWAM, Youth with a Mission. And they came to my church, and they were all young people. I always had this image of missionaries. They were my grandma, right? They were all old people. And all these young people came, and they're doing dramas, and they're preaching the gospel, and they're talking about these miracles. And I said to my mom was sitting there, and I was like, these are missionaries. And she felt like God told her, Alan is supposed to go with these people. So she went, I'm 13 years old. She went and tried to just ship me off with them right there. And so they told her, they said, he has to go do this training first. And it was this 3-week training for teenagers. And I called an SST, Summer Services Training. And whenever I went, she sent me off, and I was gone for 3 weeks. I did 10 days, roughly 10 days of training in Tyler, Texas. And then I went to Mexico, and I had never been anywhere like that before. And we were in the middle of nowhere, sleeping in tents. And I would dress up like a clown. I was 13 years old, and we would go to orphanages and play with kids and all this kind of stuff. And it was at that moment when I started to see God really be kind of active in my life, in a sense where I could see him. There was one point when we first entered into Mexico. My family, we don't have money. And so when my mom sent me on this trip, like, there was enough money for me to get there, but there really wasn't anything extra. And so when we went across to Mexico, as often happens with missionaries who are always underfunded and undermanned and undergunned, we crossed the border into Mexico, and immediately this bus called Bessie broke down. And so it's the middle of the night in Mexico. There's probably 60 of us teenagers.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, it was a huge trip. That base in Tyler is massive.
Wow.
And so the leaders, they find this Mexican mechanic, and he said, I have to take this bus to my mechanic shop. And so he takes the bus, and we can get it in the morning. And then these leaders have 60 teenagers. None of us have money, and they certainly don't have enough money to pay for a hotel. So they told us, they said, find a square of concrete. We're in the middle of the street. Find a square of concrete. That's your bed for tonight. So we all slept.
Wow.
I have pictures of my backpack because that was my pillow for the night. We slept on the side, literally on the sidewalk, all night long. And I woke up to somebody kicking me in the side. And I wake up, and there's this big Korean guy. He was a youth pastor from New Jersey who had come down. And he's nudging me in the side. And I look up, and I had never spoken to him before. I had seen him around, didn't know who he was. And he tells me, he says, get up, it's time for breakfast. Well, me being a teenager and being broke, I said, I don't have any money. And he said, don't worry about it, come with me. So he helped me up, and we walked to McDonald's, and this one man had paid for Egg McMuffins for all of the teenagers on the trip.
Wow.
Which was probably like maybe $100 for him to do. But for me, nobody had ever done something like that for me before. And I saw it as God is there when you need him. And I've experienced countless things, even way bigger than that now. But at that moment, I kind of connected the dots between what had happened with Mandy and there. Like, God isn't just this sort of smoky force out there. Like which is how a lot of people perceive him. A lot of my family perceives him that way. And I suddenly realized, like, whoa, like God, this isn't a ritual. Like, God is here. Like he actually hears me. Like he knew where I was, and that I didn't have money for breakfast. And he touched this guy who doesn't even know me to help me get breakfast. And so it was this huge moment for me. And so,
would you consider that to be like a marking moment for you for like missions?
Oh, absolutely.
Because that's what it sounds like.
And if you want, I can tell you some other stories as well later on.
Okay.
Of that very huge marking moments in my life. But after that time in Mexico, I went home, I went back to Texas, and now I was changed. Like, I knew, like, this is who I am. I will preach the gospel until I die. That's all I'll ever do. And I didn't know what it looked like, but 3 years went by. I turned 16, and I went to my parents, and I said, I feel like I'm supposed to leave home now. I feel like I'm supposed to go on the mission field now. And so I did it all the right way. I'm a big believer in submitting to authority and doing things correctly. And so I spoke with my parents. They gave me their blessing. I went to my pastor. He gave me his blessing. They all knew it was what I was called to do, what I was supposed to do. My church actually prayed for me up on the stage, and they gave me a Bible to take with me, which I still have to this day. And I started applying. I applied to all kinds of mission organizations. Everybody rejected me because I was 16. And then I got a phone call. Like, I was about to give up, and I was thinking I'm going to have to wait until I'm 18 years old. And I get a phone call, and it was the Youth with a Mission Base in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which I'd never applied to. And they called me, and they said, and I to this day don't know how this happened, but they said, we heard that you want to be a missionary, and we know you're too young, but we feel like God wants you to do it here. So we've opened up a spot for you if you still want to come do it. And so I did. I went to Minnesota. I was a terrible student because I was a really cocky 16-year-old, over spiritual, overly religious guy. And I went in just thinking I was the most spiritual guy in the world because I'd have a couple little tiny things happen in my life, And I was a terrible student. But God, in his grace, he kept working with me, And I was convinced I was supposed to go to Mexico. That's what I always thought I was going to go there. And I was sitting in class one day and I was not paying attention at all. I was, like I said, I was a terrible student. I thought, oh, I'm not going to learn anything from these classes. I'm just going to breeze through this and I'm going on the field and I can get away from all these students. That's kind of that was my mentality. So I was arrogant. And I was sitting there in this class and I had a vision, which I didn't believe in at the time. And I'm sitting there and I see myself on my knees praying. And I see, as I'm praying, I see these demons coming down. And as I pray harder, more than angels come from the other side and we're pushing the demons back. And the Lord spoke to me and he gave me a word of a biblical place, which is in the book of Revelation called Pergamum, which is one of the 7 churches of Revelation. And God told me, I want you to go to this place for 2 years. I had no idea where that was. And so I had to go look up the word in my Bible. And back then I didn't have smartphones we weren't allowed to use the internet in our school back then. So I had to get a Bible dictionary and find out where this was. And I realized this is modern day Turkey. And so I started telling everyone I'm going to Turkey. And after that, Turkey wouldn't, I was still 16. So the people in Turkey said, you can't come until you're 18. So I went back home to Texas after my training. I was here for 6 months. We started a little church with just some friends of mine. It's not around anymore, but we were doing evening worship nights and stuff. And then when 6 months went by, I went to Scotland and I did a secondary set of training in Scotland called the School of Frontier Missions. And after Scotland, I had to wait another couple months. And then I flew to Turkey 2 days after my 18th birthday. And I was there and I didn't come back for 2 years. And that was, those 2 years are what made me who I am, because that was whenever we saw real miracles, power that I had never knew existed. And also demonic manifestations, which I never knew existed. And seeing God do things that I don't even tell a lot of people today, because a lot of people I know would never even believe some of the things that have happened. And it was a time when I realized, whoa, God, there were a couple times I almost died, because it's a Muslim country. They're very anti-Christian. We had one of our missionaries, he was stabbed 20 something times and decapitated, and just by these extremists there. And my team there were 6 of us. And we were the only Christians in a 1 million person radius. And we had bomb threats all the time. We had death threats all the time. And it just, when you're an 18-year-old, that kind of stuff, it changes you.
Yeah.
And so it was then that during those times I changed like crazy. And I was also introduced during that time to a man named David Hogan. I don't know if you've heard of.
Oh yeah, I have.
So I was introduced to this man, his teachings. Our leaders there, they had all these CDs with like 100 hours of David Hogan's teachings on there, and we as a team would sit down and we would listen to those teachings together, like in meetings. And ended up going to Denmark during those 2 years, and actually at the end of my 2 years, and meeting David Hogan at a conference there, and he invited me to go to Mexico to work with him there. And so for me, I was like, oh, this is God. This is God's God saying, all right, this is your door. You're finally going to Mexico and you're going to work with David Hogan. But back then, David Hogan, he didn't use the internet. So there was no email. There was only fax. And so I went back to Texas when my 2 years were over, and I sent faxes to David Hogan every day for like 6 months and never got a response. And so finally, I'm there in Texas, and I'm living with my parents because I was planning on leaving. My parents come and they say, listen, you're a missionary. You've been messaging David Hogan for 6 months and he's not responding. So clearly the door is not open there. So you either need to go be a missionary or you need to get a job, because you can't just sit around at home for 6 months and just keep sitting here. So I had this girl that I was interested in at the time, and she was visiting me. She had been a missionary in Turkey with me, and she had come home and was visiting me. And so I told her, I said, name a country in Latin America. And she said, Panama. And I said, okay, I'm going to Panama. And I went on my computer, my parents' computer, and I filled out an application for Youth with a Mission in Panama. And within a few hours, they called me on the phone and told me to come down. And I was there within a week.
Wow.
And I stayed there. Still, Panama is still my home. I'm in Pennsylvania right now because of the quarantines and stuff. But
Sure.
Panama, I met my wife there. Both of my kids were born there.
Wow.
And we worked primarily with a tribe called the Nobe. And we have planted 9 churches there, baptized hundreds and
Wow.
hundreds of people, seen every kind of miracle you can think of. I mean, everything you can think of: AIDS, cancer,
Wow.
broken bones coming together in our hands.
Wow.
I mean, demon-possessed people being completely set free. Witch doctors. When I first got there, the amount of witchcraft that was against us was so crazy. And witch
Wow.
doctors coming to the Lord or fleeing the area because of the power of God in the area. And since then, our ministry, I stepped out of YWAM in 2000, Youth with the Mission in 2013, and I started a ministry called Found Ministries. And we work in about a dozen nations now. So we work primarily with
Wow.
unreached people groups, but we work in Panama and Colombia, Iraq, Thailand, all over Central America. And we have started working in Africa, and we've been in Nepal as well. And so that's
Wow.
kind of been my journey. We started our first missionary training school for Found last year, and it's just growing. God has just been so good. It's just been wonderful.
Wow, you've really had the the ride of a lifetime. So obviously your testimony is still going to bloom and blossom. But wow, that's wow, that's a testimony. That's the journey. Wow.
Yeah, God is so good.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Wow. So I'm a little speechless just because that's a lot under your belt, man. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
well, I have to say, one thing I have learned in all of my youthful arrogance,
yeah.
one thing now that I'm an old man, now that I'm old,
More seasoned.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is actually my 20th year of ministry now.
20th year.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm 36 now.
30.
And
Wow.
I will say one of the most valuable things I learned in my youth, after I learned to get past my pride and all that stuff,
Yeah.
which, you always have to deal with it, but is the importance of people having the right people around you. Because I've seen so many new ministers and missionaries who the vast majority never make it longer than 2 years. And it's because pride makes you isolate yourself. And so I am a huge believer in 2 things. If anyone watching this is called to ministry, I think that they're the 2 most
Yeah.
important things for you in ministry is, 1, having people that you can be transparent with, not be super religious, but really be able to be honest with. And
Yeah.
2, being able to have a good sense of humor. I have never met a
That's
person
good.
who has been long-term in ministry without having a good sense of humor. Serious people always crash and burn.
That's some really good advice for 2021.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah. Well, for those watching, I am interviewing Alan tonight. He's a blazing revivalist and missionary, and just learned myself that he's a missionary to not just one nation but
Mm-hmm.
many, and so that's I'm curious, like, when it comes down to like discipleship. I've recently watched this documentary. Maybe you've seen it. It talks about just how discipleship is really booming big especially in the Middle East. And I've kind of sometimes wondered, like, why does that not happen, in the West, in America? But I think it's because we flip flopped it. I think American churches use small groups as a means to helping needs within the church instead of having groups to help outside of the church. But anyway, what are your thoughts on discipleship?
Well, so because I have a lot of experience overseas and a lot of these, like right now, Iraq is a big place where I work. Northern
Mm-hmm.
Iraq, we work with ISIS survivors there, and
Oh wow.
I mean, Jesus is booming there. The movement of God in that place, it's amazing. I mean,
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
I've stood, I mean, overlooking Nineveh, like where Jonah would have, because that's Nineveh is
Mm,
right there in that area.
yeah.
Standing there, because ISIS actually burned down Jonah's grave. Jonah's buried in that area.
Oh really?
And yeah, they actually went in, burned his grave to the ground, and they've kind of, the ISIS, it's amazing. ISIS
Huh.
believes in Jesus so much that they target the prophets' graves, because Ezekiel,
Hmm.
Daniel, Jonah, they're all buried in northern Iraq. And ISIS goes
Wow.
in and
Hmm.
tries to desecrate their graves because they're
Hmm.
scared of them. And
Hmm.
so, but here's what I will say about discipleship. And what I have seen
Hmm.
is in these cultures where it's booming, these it's hard to talk about this because of the mentality here in the West,
Yeah. Sure.
especially here in the North. Like I'm from Texas, which is a
Hmm.
more relaxed kind of place, but in the North, I hear all the time most pride is about working hard. Like you got to work hard and you got to make your
Hmm.
money and you got to go to school and do. It's all about people take pride in being so busy that they're exhausted.
Hmm.
Even though they complain about it, they're
Hmm.
proud of the fact that they worked that hard.
Hmm.
Well, in other cultures, it's, and that's the thing here. Most people will say, "Oh, in Panama, people are lazy." Like I have a lot of Americans who will
Hmm.
come to Panama or Iraq or places like that. Oh, these people are all lazy. They just want to sit around and talk all day. Well, that's where discipleship happens, man. Like
Yeah.
if
Conversation, right?
if you read the book of Acts, I guarantee you, if you read the book of
Wow.
Acts and you think all the apostles were so busy at their daily jobs that they weren't spending hours and hours breaking bread with people and just sitting on couches and talking, you
Hmm.
misunderstand what discipleship is. Because
Yeah.
in
Wow.
ministry, your job, if you
Hmm.
want to preach, if you want to disciple people, your job is to sit around and hang out with people. Like that's the job description. Tell them about Jesus, because
Hmm.
otherwise, I American small groups, they are generally just a place for people to come for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. You can't do discipleship in that time. You
Yeah.
got to be living
Hmm.
life together. You have to do life
Hmm.
together. And that's what
Yeah.
happens. That's why it's booming in these other
Hmm.
countries. In somewhere like Panama where I am, I don't we've planted churches and we have really strong disciples in those areas,
Hmm.
not because we actually don't even have organized small groups, to be honest with you. We don't even do that. We
Hmm.
just make it a priority. We go to people's houses and we hang out, we drink coffee and we eat rice and beans with them,
Hmm.
and we play board games and we sit and we have fun. And
You just get
as you're
down to
doing that,
get down to their level.
yeah,
That's
man.
amazing. Yeah.
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 And so we don't do that. In the West, we don't do that. In the
Hmm.
West, everything is so structured and so organized and so coordinated. It's like, all right, we're going to come in, we're going to have our 15-minute devotional that we're going to read. Each person is going to share what their thoughts are
Hmm.
on that thing. And then we're going to kind of maybe pray for somebody's problem. And then
Hmm.
we won't follow up on it for another week or two. And
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, something just came to me as you were saying this, and that is, do you think some of the things that are happening in today's world is due to a lack of conversation? Now, what I mean by that is healthy conversation that uh what I mean? Like conversation that um like you've done, like kind of come to their level and just be a listening ear, like
I
do
think
you
you're
think
talking
that's
about all the,
part of it? Do you think that's
yeah.
part of
Oh,
it?
Are you talking about just the craziness like right now, all this
Well,
political stuff,
just
or?
yeah, you could say that. Just just some of the just some of the things that have been happening, here in America and other parts of the world. But yeah, yeah, if you wanna, we can talk about America here. Yeah, do you think some of the things that are going on is due to a lack of conversation?
Yeah, I think what the problem is living in a culture, in a global culture where you are, everyone is in a bubble being told that what they believe is right, and
Mm-hmm.
what they like, all these algorithms on Facebook and social media and all this. And here's the
Yeah,
thing, I'm on Facebook.
yeah,
These things are awesome tools. I mean, right now we're streaming on Facebook. So
yeah.
I'm definitely not an anti Facebook or any of that. But I will
Sure.
say that they they are businesses, and the
Mm-hmm.
business model is to feed you what you want to hear. And the problem is,
Mm.
if it's like if you're overweight, right? And you want to go on a diet, like you're addicted to sugar,
Mm.
right? If you're addicted to sugar and you decide, like my children, okay, let's take my children. Okay, my children, my youngest, he loves sugar. He loves sweets. He has a sweet tooth. I'm not so much, but if
Mm.
I go in and I put a and I he's used to eating chocolate chip pancakes every single morning for breakfast.
Mm.
But instead of chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast, he wakes up and I have oatmeal or broccoli or something like that. He gets
Mm-hmm.
offended. He gets offended that I have put something else on his plate, because
Mm.
that's not what he's used to, because he hasn't been taught that you have to have a variety, you have to have a balanced diet.
Mm.
And I think, and so he has to get accustomed to that. I think, in a sense, I feel like that's what's happened,
Mm.
is because we've all been we have this stream of information, of
Mm.
algorithms that are created to keep us engaged as much as possible. So
Mm.
it feeds us things that we like, that we want. So whenever something we don't agree with comes on our plate, we get offended by it.
Mm.
And some people react really, really immaturely because they don't know how to handle it. No one's taught them
Mm.
how to deal with it.
Mhm.
When I tell you what,
Yeah.
going overseas, going to some places that I work, I'm with Christians who believe their doctrines are so wildly different from mine, but we can work together in total
Mm.
harmony and peace because we believe in Jesus. We have common ground.
That's
But
beautiful.
yeah,
That's beautiful. Wow.
yeah,
Wow. That's great. Wow. Yeah. I mean, obviously, conversation is an art and a science.
yeah.
But what you were sharing with me just really kind of sparked that theory and that idea. Uh, just to kind of shift gears here a little bit, I'm just curious. On your Facebook, profile, you mentioned yourself as a revivalist. I'm just curious, what is your take on revival?
So for me, uh, I do believe that revival. Here's the thing. I think that we have a lot of false revival,
Mm, mm-hmm,
uh, because I'm a big church history guy. I love
mm,
church history. And one thing, when you really study revival, when you really look at it, it comes in all kinds of different forms and fashions, right?
mm, mm-hmm,
All kind. There's always power. There's always the power of God in one way or another, but it's not always the same.
mm,
But what is the same in there are threads that go through revival that are all the same.
mm-hmm,
And one of those things, from scripture all the way up to modern day, is lasting impact on society.
mm,
It doesn't have to be necessarily a nationwide impact, because a lot of revivals only impacted a town or
mm,
only impacted a city, but there's lasting impact. And so whenever I say revival, I almost, whenever you say that, I almost think I should remove that, because that gives a sense, because there is a
mm,
connotation that comes with the word revivalist
mm,
now, which is somebody who sort of travels and preaches, and miracles and things like that happen, which is valid. Like, we need that ministry, and I do
mm-hmm,
that. I
mm-hmm.
do travel all over the states, all over the world, and I preach, and miracles do happen.
Yeah.
But revival to me is a shift in people to their core.
Mm,
It is whenever people, they have an encounter with God that changes them. I remember
mm,
we talked about key moments in my life, and there was a moment I had seen miracles, but I will tell you right now, miracles are great. I've seen more miracles than I remember now. I've forgotten more than I remember now, because
Wow.
God really does move, and he really is powerful. But I tell you what, the presence of God, like really the presence of God, when you really, there is nothing that compares to it. Nothing. And I remember I had been in Turkey for, it was probably about a year. And we had seen miracles. I mean, we'd cast demons out of people. I'd never done that before. We'd seen all really powerful things. And there was this moment when my team, we were in this building. We would lead a youth group. We had a youth group for missionary kids, and we led a college student group for Turkish students. They were mostly Muslims. And we had to change locations frequently because of the bomb threats, and people want, it was just violent and all that stuff. And we were there. It was just my team. It was before the group was going to start. And we were just in a circle, like any other prayer circle. But my team, we would pray a lot. I mean, we would get up every morning at like 6 together as a team, from Monday to Friday, and we would all pray together for 2 or 3 hours, just seeking God. And we're sitting there in this circle together, and we're just praying. Nothing special. There's a word in Scripture that a lot of people look over, but it's so important, which is the word suddenly, because that's usually how it is with God. And we're there in this circle, and we're just praying, and suddenly, man, God came in the room. And I had never experienced this before, but I'm telling you, like he was there. Not like your usual, like Sunday morning, you feel that little tinge of the presence of God. Like it was so, like, I hate using the word thick because it's so cliche now, but it was so tangible in the room. We were scared to move. And the thing was, it wasn't just me. We were all there, and we all felt it. We felt everything change. And I remember there's only 6 of us, and we are all praying, and we all start looking up, and we're looking at each other, and all of us are kind of mouthing to each other like, what is happening? What is happening right now? Because it was so powerful, and everyone was too scared to move. And we didn't hear anything. We didn't have some collective vision it happens. None of that happened, but just God came into the room. And it was maybe 5-10 minutes. None of us moved. We were all too scared to move. And it just lifted. And I remember all of us, we all felt it lift at the same time. And we all sat up, and all of us just started nervous laughing because we didn't know what else to do. And those moments, like for me, when I think of revival, it's those moments of when you, whether it's individually or in a church or at work or whatever, you have that wow moment with God where you're like, whoa, he hears me. Like he's here.
Very good. Okay. I mean, I think, one of the reasons why I'm asking is because I think some of the church doesn't really know what revival is. And then some think they know what it is, but I feel like God is reforming what that looks like.
Yes.
And with that said, since I just learned now that you are, you have a large knowledge base in church history. I think it was Dr. Mark Schroeder that mentioned that, one of the issues with modern day prophets today is their lack of digging into church history. With that said,
man.
with that said, where do you think the church is headed in the next 3 to 5 years? Knowing the principle of history repeats itself, but in that dogma, where do you see the church in the next 3 to 5 years based upon your knowledge base of church history?
You're going to get me in trouble now.
I'm not trying to.
I'm glad I can't see how many people are watching right now.
There's only two people, but that's okay.
Good. That's better.
But it builds to a couple hundred as the days progress. So
yeah. I know that's how it is on mine as well. So here's the thing. If you have been listening to my podcast, then one of my biggest things right now that I have been talking to, I think you and I even talked about this too on the episode I did with you.
Okay.
Is the whole thing about modern day big name speakers, and a
Mm.
lot of the prophets who, people are going to get mad at me. I'm sorry for those of you who are going to get mad at me for this, but it's just the prophets were wrong on what
Mm.
was going to happen in this election. And I'm not a political guy. I live
Mm-hmm.
overseas, so I barely even know what's happening. But here in the
Yeah.
States, a lot of times. But what I do know is a lot of prophets were completely wrong on the way they prophesied on what was
Mm.
happening. And here's the thing: that's okay. That's okay. We live in the New Testament. People get it wrong, and I get that. I've been
Mm-hmm.
wrong too when I prophesied. But what has happened, this for me, this has been a lot of sifting
Mm.
in the church, because what has happened is some of these prophets, they have done the right thing and they've apologized and they said, "Look, I messed up.
Mm-hmm.
Please forgive me." That's the right thing to do. But a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them have taken a position of pride and
Mm.
manipulation and have started putting out these verses like "Thou shalt not." There's one who I know who kept putting out like "Thou shalt not." Thou shalt not touch the Lord's anointed, like threatening verses.
Mm.
And that's wrong. That's pride.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but what I think is all of this, and I just do want to say I'm not against big name speakers at all, because this Bible is very clear that God
Yeah.
lifts up people. So it's not that.
Yeah.
It's people who have turned their ministry into a business. And I'm not talking about selling books and stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about
Mm-hmm.
the nature of it is their ministries move out of a business mindset rather than prayer and rather than God flowing through. So what I think is happening, what I think is coming, is there's going to be a major shift, a major sifting in the church. And a lot of people who have been big name pillars in the church, I think, are going to be sifted out. And I think that God is going to raise up new people who haven't had this, they haven't turned into business people.
Mm.
And I think that there's going to be a major shift. But honestly,
Mm.
what I see right now, and I see in my circle anyway, I don't know about your circle. I know you and I we're in different groups, right? We believe very similarly, but we're just the people that we're around. The people that we're around are different, you know.
Uh-huh.
And I know that in my circle, and this is something I've been very vocal about on my podcast, is a lot of people are really struggling. I get a lot of questions, people who are struggling with what do we do?
Mm.
Because people have put all of these faith in prophets and leaders in the church
Mm.
who were not only wrong, but are now almost in a position of immaturity and not being examples in what to do when you are wrong. So people are questioning. So I think that God is going to start sifting things. He's going to start shifting and moving, and we're going to see new people rise up. And I think we're going to see some people fade into the background. And not that their mission, not that their salvation's gone or anything like that, but just I just think that God will do that.
So do you believe we're on the cusp of a changing of the guard, if you will?
I think we're on the cusp
Because
of a changing of the guard, and I think we're on the cusp of the next of a huge revival. And I really tried to avoid all the cliches as much as possible, but
I understand.
if church history has taught anything, it
Yeah.
is that the moment that we are in right now, like right this very moment, is when one of two things happen. I think one of two things is inevitable.
Yeah.
I think either revival is coming to the United States or things are going to start crumbling, because that's just historically that's what happened. Personally, I think it's revival. And the reason I think it's revival is because there are too many men and women of God who are praying for it, and God does hear us. If I know anything, I know he hears us.
Amen. Amen. Well, I'm with you, believing and contending for revival. And like you said, not in the cliche-ness of what that means, but just in the transformation of what that brings on the earth and in people's lives. So we're coming down to the wire here. I'm just curious, is there anything else you want to share, with the audience that's, on your heart? There's people here that are watching that are, just coming into ministry, those that are seasoned in ministry, and then we even have some marketplace leaders as well. What would you tell this group of people?
Listen, do not get discouraged. I know that things are really tough right now for a lot of people. Some people are doing wonderful, but I know a lot of people are really struggling. But just, I want to encourage you not to get discouraged, because this is the time. As someone who has lived in really difficult conditions, and I spent after Turkey, I spent several years with a backpack and a guy from Norway hiking through the mountains, sleeping under banana trees, eating you can't imagine the stuff that we've eaten, the sicknesses that we've had, and it gets discouraging and it gets lonely. And even if you're quarantined or you're going through a hard time, let me tell you something. This is right now is the breeding ground for the power of God to start manifesting. Like right now. Don't let yourself get all huddled up and discouraged and isolated. I'm telling you, now is the time when these are the circumstances where God starts breaking through and powerful things start happening. So read the word of God, pray, step out in faith, and I'm telling you, amazing things are coming.
There you have it, guys. Amazing things are going to happen. So, Alan, where can people find more about your ministry, your podcast, and all that?
So primarily my ministry is Found Ministries. So we have a Facebook page, Found Ministries. And we also have our website, foundministries.org. And that's where people can learn about our ministry. I have my podcast, which is Revival Carriers, which you can find that. I have it on YouTube. I don't do live streams, but you can go to Revival Carriers on YouTube. You can go on iTunes or whatever. And I also have a website, revivalcarriers.com. I will say with the podcast, I've got a lot of really amazing episodes with like Sam Childers and Brian Simmons and all these. But now that things are starting to open up again, I'm starting to travel more. I'm actually traveling to Texas in just a couple of weeks, and then we're going to Mexico to teach in a missionary school. Wow. So the episodes are not, I don't know how often they're going to be now, or how frequently, but the podcast is there, and I'll upload when I can, and there's a lot of amazing episodes right now.
Fabulous. Well, you guys, I highly recommend to check out Alan's podcast. Great quality conversations and quality people, and you'll definitely learn something. Thank you, everyone, for watching tonight. Stay tuned for the next episode.